The Icelandic Coast Guard is the service responsible for Iceland's coastal defense and maritime and aeronautical search and rescue. Its origins can be traced to 1859, when the corvette Ørnen started patrolling Icelandic waters. In 1906, Iceland's first purposely built guard ship, Island's Falk, began operation. Iceland's own defense of its territorial waters began around 1920 and the Icelandic Coast Guard was formally founded on July 1, 1926. The first cannon was put on the trawler Ægir in 1924 and on June 23, 1926 the first ship built for the Coast Guard, named Ægir, arrived in Iceland. 3 years later, on 14 July 1929 the coastal defense ship Ægir was added to the Coast Guard fleet. The Icelandic Coast Guard played its largest role during the Cod Wars between 1972 and 1975, when the Coast Guard ships would cut the trawl wires of British and West German trawlers and engaged in confrontations with Royal Navy warships, in order to enforce a disputed expansion on Icelandic fishing territory. The Coast Guard also maintains the Iceland Air Defence System which conducts ground surveillance of Iceland's airspace. Operations. The Icelandic Coast Guard's primary mission is the defending the Icelandic sovereignty, integrity of the territorial waters, maintaining Icelandic law and order inside the 200 nanometers wide economic zone as well as other vital missions such as search and rescue. The Coast Guard operates JRCC Iceland which is responsible for search and rescue of vessels and aircraft in Iceland's search and rescue region according to International Aeronautical and Maritime Search and Rescue Manual. Additionally the ICG is in the charge of defusing naval mines, most of which were laid during the Second World War, and monitoring fisheries in international waters outside of the Icelandic Economic Zone in order to blacklist any vessel partaking in unregulated fishing and thus bar them from receiving services from any member of the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission in order to make unregulated fishing unprofitable. The Icelandic Coast Guard also occasionally operates within Greenlandic and Faroese waters, following a bilateral agreement with Denmark regarding mutual aid in security, rescue and defense matters. The Coast Guard accomplishes these tasks with the use of offshore patrol vessels, helicopters, surveillance aircraft, satellites and a network of land-based surface scanning radar. The Icelandic Coast Guard is also in charge of the Iceland Air Defence System, which operates 4 ground-based ANFPS-117V5 air surveillance radars and a control and command center. In the 1990s the Coast Guard started hosting exercises such as Northern Challenge, which had military units from Norway, Denmark, Sweden and the United Kingdom, among others, participating along with the Icelandic Coast Guard. The Coast Guard has also taken part in peacekeeping operations on behalf of the Icelandic Crisis Response Unit, although while usually using their own rank insignia, uniforms and weapons. The fleet also takes part in Frontex operations, and in that role ICGV Tar-1 played a major part in the rescue of over 300 Syrian refugees in the eastern Mediterranean Sea in January 2015. Fleet. Currently the Icelandic Coast Guard fleet consists of 3 offshore patrol vessels, 1 coastal hydrographic and patrol vessel and an independent fast RHIB, as well as numerous smaller boats assigned to the larger units. In 2011 the Coast Guard received the new ICGV Ægir built by the ASMA shipyard in Talcahuano, Chile. ICGV Tar-1, an Ægir class, is the second youngest, built by Flydedoc AS and launched in 1975. ICGV Ægir and Ægir class is ICGV Tar-1's sister ship, built by OLBORG-VRFTAS and launched in 1968. Each ship is equipped with 2 or more rigid inflatable boats of various sizes and armed with a 40mm Bofors cannon. Various kinds of small arms as well as other man-portable weapons are also carried on board each of the ships. Tar-1 and Ægir are also equipped with sonar systems and the Ægir-class sister ships have flight decks and a hangar for a small helicopter. While the Coast Guard currently doesn't operate small enough helicopters to use the hangars, the flight decks are often used by the helicopters of the Aeronautical Division on various missions. The Coast Guard has as well a 64-ton hydrographic survey boat, named Balder, It was built by VAR copyright LSMIA degree Jasira degree Isera degree in 1991. This vessel has no mounted weaponry, but it has nonetheless been used for port security and fishery inspection. Aeronautical Division. The Coast Guard's Aeronautical Division was founded on December 10, 1955 when a consolidated PBY-6A Catalina flying boat was acquired. It was originally from the Iceland Defence Force but was damaged near Langanes in 1954. It was registered as TF RAN and nicknamed Ørnen. Currently the Icelandic Coast Guard operates two Territorial AS-332L1 Super Puma helicopters, which are registered as TFLIF and TFGNA. As a response to the withdrawal of the Iceland Defence Force at the year 2006, the Coast Guard operated 4 helicopters, but this number has been reduced to 3 as of 2015. The Coast Guard also operates a single bombardier DHC-8Q314, registered as TFSIF, modified for maritime surveillance and reconnaissance. This plane has been extensively modified by Field to carry a modern mission management system and suite of surveillance sensors, air-operable door and communications navigation equipment. It is occasionally also used for surveillance of volcanic eruptions, for example Avuja, a larger paragraph cull in 2010. Unlike the fleet, aircraft of the Icelandic Coast Guard have standard Icelandic civilian registers, as the ALA 3/4 Ingi has never agreed on laws for military or government aircraft. Over the time since the division was formed, the regulations for standard civilian aircraft have become more restrictive. As a result, the Coast Guard can no longer operate military aircraft like it did in the past. Nevertheless, current helicopters are outfitted with latest generation U.S. night vision equipment, reserved for U.S. armed forces and the armies of their allies, and thus the only civilian registered aircraft in the world, so equipped. Ships and aircraft. All major vehicles of the Icelandic Coast Guard are currently named after beings from Norse mythology. Currently operated vessels: ICGVA Cubed are a Chilean-built UT-512L type offshore patrol vessel commissioned in late 2011 and the flagship of the service. Named after Cubed, the god of thunder, lighting and troll slaying. ICGV Tar 1/2 are a Danish-built Ægir-class offshore patrol vessel named after Tar 1/2, the god of combat and heroism. ICGV Ægir, a Danish-built Ægir-class offshore patrol vessel named after Ægir, the king of the sea. ICGV Baldur, an Icelandic-built Baldur-class hydrographic survey and patrol boat named after Baldur, god of beauty and more. Currently operated aircraft: TFSIF is a bombardier DHC-8Q314 named after Sif, goddess and wife of Ægir, the god of thunder and troll slaying. Used for maritime surveillance and replaced Fokker F-27. TFLIF is an all copyright Rospartial AS-332L1 Super Puma named after Laif, the only woman who will survive Ragnarok paragraph K. Used for maritime surveillance and search and rescue operations. Currently operated leased aircraft: TFGNA and TFSYN are on long-term leased Eurocopter AS-332L1 Super Pumas from Airlift AS of Sweden and acquired provide assistance to TFLIF. Decommissioned vessels: ICGV degree in, ICGV Gorta, originally named degree in but renamed when a new degree in arrived. Gorta is one of degree in's pseudonyms. ICGV degree in, an offshore patrol vessel named after degree in, the all-seeing father of the gods. ICGV Baldur, a fast patrol boat used for less than a year and returned because of bad characteristics in rough seas. ICGV Baldur, an armed trawler. ICGV Bragi, named after Bragi, the god of poetry. A fast patrol boat used for less than a year and returned because of bad characteristics in rough seas. ICGV NJA paragraph R degree named after NJA paragraph R degree Riama, the god of wind, fertile land along the sea coast, as well as seamanship, sailing and fishing. A fast patrol boat used for less than a year and returned because of bad characteristics in rough seas. ICGV Tar 1/2 a whaler borrowed during the Second Cod War, usually called HVAL Tar 1/2 ICGV Ægir, ICGV Ægir, ICGV other historical vessels that haven't adhered to the Norse mythology tradition, ICGV Albert, patrol and rescue vessel. Joint ownership by the ICG and the National Lifesaving Association of Iceland, now ICE-SAR. Operated by the ICG. ICGV LRVAKUR, a lighthouse tender and patrol ship decommissioned in the 1970s. ICGV Mara Ajala, patrol and rescue vessel, named after one of those who financed her construction. Joint ownership by the ICG and the National Lifesaving Association of Iceland. Operated by the ICG. ICGV Zabja Paragraph AG, a patrol and rescue ship owned by the National Lifesaving Association of Iceland but operated by the ICG. ICG Viva, an armed trawler. Operated by the ICG in the last Cod War in 1975 to 1976. Decommissioned aircraft, TF RAN Consolidated PBY-6A Catalina, named after Ørnen. TFSIF Douglas C-54 Skymaster. TFSYR Fokker F-27 Friendship 200. TFEIR Bell 47J, TFGNA Sikorsky S-62. TF Hug Bell 47G named after Hugin, one of Óðinn's ravens who flew over the world every morning to gather information for him. TFMUN Bell 47G named after Munin, one of Óðinn's ravens who flew over the world every morning to gather information for him. TFGRO Hughes 500C Defender. TF RAN Sikorsky S-76 Spirit. TFGRO Hughes 500C Defender. TFGRO Eurocopter AS-350B Akuruil. TFSIF was an all copyright Rospartial SA-365 Endorphin II, which was operated from 1984 to 1985. TFSIF was an all copyright Rospartial SA-365 Endorphin II. It was bought new in 1985 but was destroyed after an emergency sea landing in July 2007. TFSYN was a Fokker F-27-200 Friendship, which was bought new in 1976 and used until 2009. Currently preserved at the Aviation Museum of Akureyri. TFEIR is an all copyright Rospartial SA-365N1 Dolphin II. In addition, the Coast Guard has rented or borrowed a number of civilian vessels and aircraft for shorter periods, which are not listed. Weaponry: the Icelandic Coast Guard possesses 212 firearms, most of which are in storage. Currently in use currently in storage Ranks officers enlisted See also, Military of Iceland, Iceland Defence Force, Cod Wars. References. External links: official site in English, Landhelgiska/Slands in Icelandic. Coast Guard laws in Icelandic. Info on Icelandic Coast Guard, Randburg discussion on Icelandic Coast Guard, ranks of the Icelandic Coast Guard.